Hello and welcome to RS Agarwal's IAS. In this video of the Daily News Express, let us discuss the important topics appearing in the Hindu newspaper dated 21st December 2020. Let us start. This is the list of topics that we'll be discussing today. First, we'll talk about the Shakti Bill introduced by the Maharashtra government. Then we'll talk about the lows or the negatives in the Indian healthcare system. We'll discuss about how we can bounce back with the economic perspective about what can we do to bounce back as a fast growing economy. We'll talk from the ethics perspective about how to deal with the farmers issue. We'll discuss some prelim facts and end the discussion by learning some map points. Let us go further. Now this article talks about the Maharashtra's Shakti bill that was brought forth by the Maharashtra government to enhance protection of women and to deal with the problem of sexual violence and sexual crimes. Now the authors in this article believe that this bill that was introduced by the government follows same old conventional methods and does nothing new, as in they say that to control these kind of problems, what government should do, the government should focus on the grassroots level and should make sure the infrastructure is set right, rather than bringing harsher punishments, rather than bringing more authorities and wider definitions. They have to understand the present legal system, they have to work on the infrastructure and do this in a consultative manner. Now, more also, this article talks about the negatives that this bill comes with. So let us first understand the basic things that they're trying to say. First, we understood that these are the things that they should have done, and the authors try to explain what is a proper criminal justice system, that is an effective criminal justice system. What comprises of an effective criminal justice system? First is fair and just laws. First aspect of the criminal justice system which is effective is fair and just laws. Second is a robust investigative mechanism. A robust investigative mechanism that will be strong and effective in the way it investigates. Then a dynamic and you can say a judiciary or a judicial setup which is dynamic in nature. Then you can talk about adequate and indispensable infrastructure. All these comes into picture if you talk about a effective criminal justice system, that is fair and just laws, robust investigative mechanism, dynamic judiciary, and adequate and you can say proper infrastructure. Now, recent times we have seen several laws brought forth by the government to make sure that this sexual crimes or sexual violence is reduced. You can say the after the Nirbhaya case, several changes were made. You can say the Verma committee was implement the recommendations of Verma committee were implemented. But the fact of the matter is that the changes that were supposed to be made in the infrastructure, you can say, or you can say in the effective implementation, have not been made, and these are the things that are threatening the effectiveness of a proper criminal justice system. Now let's jump into what are the various provisions of these bills. First, this bill, the authors are saying that it carries some patriarchal ideas. Now, what are these patriarchal ideas? Now, this bill first of all says if a complaint is false, if a complaint is fake, then the person who lodges the complaint is punishable, right? The person who lodges the complaint is punishable, and you can say this person who has lodged the complaint will be called as unworthy of being trusted and has disturbed the legal mechanism. Now, what happens here is that when a woman goes through these problems, most of the time it is behind closed doors and it is in a setting of four walls, which is most of the time that could not be proven, has not been proven, and is not recorded, you can say. And when these things happen and when the case is not proven, what happens is the woman becomes again the victim of the problem, and counter cases are filed on her, and the thing backfires on her if it is not proven. The fact that if it is done or not is secondary. Primarily, when an allegation is made, it has to be considered. And if it turns out to be false, then counter cases will be filed and there will be a bigger issue. Now, what happens is most women are very confident and are sure that this will be a case, but some women are not. So what happens is even if they have faced it, they will be afraid in going and complaining because they are afraid it will not be proven, and in return they will be called as the, you can say, accused, or they will be called as someone as the perpetrator. So this is one flip side of this idea. It is the authors are saying that this provision points out to patriarchal conception that women are manipulative liars and unworthy of being trusted. So this is one factor that is coming into play. Second factor you can say is how this law punishes sexual offenses with death penalty. It punishes sexual offenses with death penalty. Now what happens with this factor is when it becomes a death penalty, first of all, the definition is pretty vague here of the heinous crime. Okay, they are saying something like the heinous crime. So let me read out what exactly they are saying. The amendment relevant section adds that in cases where, in quotes, the characteristics of the offense is heinous in nature, where adequate conclusive evidence is there and circumstances warrant exemplary punishment, the offense shall be punishable with death. Again, here the definition is very ambiguous. And what is heinous? What is heinous? It's saying that the characteristics of the offense is heinous in nature, and where adequate conclusive evidence is there, it becomes open to punishable with death. Now, who decides what is heinous? It is the court. Now, this can be subject to various interpretations. Now, who knows what qualifies to be heinous or what according to which judge is heinous? So again, this is a very vague thing that comes into picture. Now we have understood that though we have death penalties in the country, we have had death penalties in the country, we still have them. Even then, the crimes have not stopped, right? Even then the crimes have not stopped, and this death penalty has not acted as a potent deterrent to stop crimes. So rather than bringing stricter laws like death penalties, we should work on making the system more effective and the thing more powerful. Other thing what we can come into it comes to our mind is that most of the time when there's a death penalty, judges in the court don't resort to death penalty. They don't give it. And we have hardly seen convictions in death penalty except for Ajmal Kasab and such kind of Tada and terrorism, those kind of activities, and we saw for Nirbhaya as well. But most of the time, death penalty has not been considered too. So this is another problem. Last but not the least, you can say with regards to death penalty, most of the time the perpetrator or the person who is accused is a close relative of women, right? And when the family realizes that it's a close relative, they will stop the woman from going and complaining to the police because they don't want the uh, person who is a part of their family to die or to lose his life because of this activity. Very strange, very ironical, but yes, that's the truth. So these are the various things that are coming into picture now. You can also take into account the fact that because of the because of the death penalty coming into picture, there will be various drawbacks that the law will be suffering from, or the people will be suffering from, because death penalty has not always been in the favor of the people. Going further going further we have to understand that this act provides that the investigation should be completed in 15 days, and the trial should be completed in 30 days, and the appeal should be done in 45 days. Now, okay, this makes sense. You have to be fast tracked, but in the process of making it fast tracked and better, the police or the investigating officers can commit mistakes or can be subjected to pressure, and this can be miscarriage of justice. So, this thing is another drawback of this act. We have seen that POSCO Act, in that they have added the fast track thing, and we are seeing a lot of problems that go under the POSCO Act. Again, further, the bill does not state what happens if the investigation is not completed. If it is not completed, what happens? Even that time, what happens? It's not stated. And in the current system, the police officers are, you can say, saddled with a large number of cases. They are burdened with a large number of cases, and there are so many things going on. So they might be subjected to pressure. They might be subjected to some mishaps, and they might be subjected to various problems. So this will not just put the life and the evidences of the victim at, you can say, at stake, but also the career and the lives of police officers also at stake. So these are the next factor that we can talk about. Going further, we understand that the last thing the proposed amendment seems to have recommended without considering similar already existing provisions. So what the author said in the first, that instead of bringing more and more laws, we need to better our laws. So they're saying that there was already section 354E in the IPC, which talks about harassment on women through social media platforms. and then you have the IT Act 2000, which spoke about the same thing. So instead of bringing more and more redundant legislations, we have to work on the bettering of the legal system, of the bettering of the criminal justice system, the bettering of the investigative mechanism, and this can be bettering the scenario rather than bringing more laws and bringing wider definitions, etc. Hence, in effect, these proposed amendments are of little significance, is what they are saying. They are of little significance, and they should be bettered in a manner where more consultation has to be done with experts, and then it should be brought forth in the right way. This is a welcome move. No doubt this is a welcome move, and it would be better in the interest of women and justice itself. The committee had a larger consultative process while engaging stakeholders. So, will the Maharashtra government reconsider it? We have no idea. But these are the flip sides. These people are author. These authors are lawyers who are seeing this. So there are a lot of drawbacks that are coming into picture, and various takeaways are there in this article that we can mention in our answers as well. With this, let us move on to the next article of the day. Here we are talking about the laws in the Indian healthcare system, and this caters to GS paper 2. Now, Indian healthcare system has been widely exposed during the COVID-19 pandemic. The novel coronavirus has widely exposed the Indian healthcare system. There are some facts that the author provides here. Now, the Indian healthcare system is 70% composed of private and 30% of public. Private as in the private hospitals, 30% are the government hospitals, and it is also seen in this article that 80% of people do not have protection for health, and you can say out of pocket expenditure is as high as 62% out of pocket expenditure, which is not covered by any government policies as such. So these are some facts: 70% private, 30% public, 80% people don't have health coverage, and 62% out of pocket expenditure. What is the government spending on healthcare? It's only 1.13%. Very dismally low for a huge nation like India. It is very less. 1.13% of GDP is spent on healthcare. There is particularly a dearth of healthcare workers, midwives, nurses, etc. And proper policies and proper moves have not been witnessed. So these are the things that we are seeing. Let us go a little further and try to understand what the author is saying. 85% of the population cannot afford high cost healthcare. High cost healthcare, as in that is provided in private healthcare hospitals, they cannot afford it. And what happens here in private healthcare is that they have highly specialized doctors, you have specialists, you have emergency medical services, you have great things, but none of them are accessed by, you can say, 85% of the population, because they simply cannot afford it. And then comes into picture insurance. Insurance comes into picture. You must have all heard about health insurance. Now the government has provided them with health insurance, and going a little away from what we are trying to say, we can talk about Ayushman Bharat. Now when I talk about Ayushman Bharat, there are 12 crore card holders. Okay, just know that there are 12 crore card holders, and only 1.27 crore people have taken advantage of the Ayushman Bharat scheme. Okay, so these are the people who are aware, and this is the people how they are taking it further. Now, apart from Ayushman Bharat, also if you have general insurance that you have done from some other public sector units or some other things, what an insurance does to these private hospitals is this insurance provides a space for them to expand the bill. So of course there will be a bill that they will make for you, and if you have insurance, they will expand your bill. So the author is saying that this incentivizes hospitals to expand the bill, but the patients do not get the best attention even though they are paying so much money. Now this can also become an incentive for driving down prices of procedure, but then at the end of the day, they will get the procedure or not is a question that we have to answer, and this will be completely in the interest of the hospital and not in the interest of the patients. Going further, what we can learn next is that social insurance as an aspect social insurance as an aspect has solved the problem of equilibrium, but the majority is still affected with the problem of affordability. Well, a lot of people can get insurance, most people cannot get insurance, is what the author is saying. Going further, the author says that in health economics, so he's talking about the economics in the health scenario. In health economics, competitive equilibrium often does not exist. Competitive equilibrium, as in equality between various sectors through competition, does not exist. The behavior of a private corporate hospital is always towards profitability. It is not towards saving the lives of the people, it is always towards profitability. And of course, the rich people and those in advantage get attention from the hospital and not those who are poor. Okay, next point we are trying to analyze is that the thing that comes into picture is insurance for what you call as secondary and tertiary healthcare. Okay, this is primarily not present. Yes, Ayushman Bharat does cater to it, but primarily it is not present. Again, this is a major backdrop. Apart from this, you can learn about primary healthcare. Now, primary healthcare is mostly neglected in the country. This is the most basic thing that we need. Please notice, primary healthcare is mostly neglected and this needs proper attention. So India's health problem today, as the author is saying, has the 80 is to 20 rule. He's saying that they have 80 is to 20 rule. Now 20% of the people are rich and well off. They can afford modern healthcare, they can afford private hospitals, and here this 80 is divided into 40-40. Now this 40% cannot afford at all, they cannot afford anything at all, and this 40% do their best, push their envelope, go out of the bounds to pay the hospital bills. And once they do that, they slowly start sliding into this bracket called as poverty. Now things are coming into picture: access, affordability, absence of quality manpower, rent seeking behavior of the staff, profitability inclination, all these things are coming into picture. Now let me delete this. Now, because of the problem of access, affordability, absence of quality manpower, and rent seeking behavior of the staff, more than 80% of the people are routinely reaching registered medical practitioners. Right? They are going to the smaller doctors who are there nearest to their house, and these doctors are giving them antibiotics and steroids. What is this making us? This is making us antibiotic resistant, or the antimicrobial resistance is developing, and we are falling in this big hidden pandemic called as antimicrobial resistance, where the microbes or bacteria is developing resistance to the antibiotics that we eat. Forget about this practitioners, people just go to the medicals or the chemist and they take their medicines from the chemist. Again, this is pushing us into the bracket of antimicrobial resistance. Now what we are supposed to do when we are suffering from this kind of problem, that is lack of doctors and others, there are three options that are provided by the author here. There are three options that are provided. First is we have to ramp up the number of doctors who are who have the counterpart obligation to serve in the rural areas. We have to ramp up the number of doctors there. Second, what happens is, what we can do is, we need to revive licentiate medical practitioners. We need to revive it. We have like how we had it before the independence, where they have to take care of the people and they are properly licensed to do so. Third is nursing aspect, where we should allow the candidates or graduates of BSc to be nursing practitioners in order to meet the dearth of nurses in the country. I'll come to that, but we believe nurses are an important factor when it comes to dealing with problems, and during the pandemic also they played a very important role, and most importantly they are a very important aspect of the primary healthcare system in the country. Okay, going further, let's talk a little bit about the primary healthcare system in the country. Now primary healthcare system is severely neglected and funds are not devolved to the primary healthcare system. Just look around you or go to the nearest primary healthcare center in your area. See how good it is and what are the problems in that primary healthcare system. The author is saying that the primary healthcare center has to receive thrice the more amount of budget that it's currently receiving, and the right kind of doctors need to be provided, the right kind of nurses have to be provided. The thing is that infrastructure has to be bettered, and in rural areas there is something called as absenteeism, and this absenteeism has to be corrected. If you talk about nurses, I told you that in India the ratio is 0.06 nurse per doctor. 0.06. WHO says the specified ratio should be 3 nurses per doctor, but this is not the case. And in states like Uttar Pradesh and Bihar, this is dismally low. So we have to take care of this scenario. So the author is saying that we have to start from basics. We have to give attention to primary healthcare. We have to give attention to the workers, healthcare workers in the country, and this will propel the healthcare system. So if we look at the smaller things first in the right manner, if we look at the smaller things, in the end we can see the bigger picture coming together. So all these scenarios are there. Of course, we can talk about expenditure of GDP. We should at least spend 6% of our GDP on healthcare. Only then we'll be able to reach a good place. With this, let us move on to the next article of the day. Here we are talking about how we can bounce back. These are some aspects with regards to India's economy. These are very commonsensical things. Just listen to them carefully so that you'll be able to write the answer well. Now, because of non-economic factor like the novel coronavirus, our economy crashed, and in the first quarter we were in the minus, and the second quarter we are a little better. But then even this is not good because this is called as technical recession. Right? This is called as technical recession, and government has to play a very important role, and the monetary policy makers have to play a very important role to make this scenario better and proper so that people and the economy bounces back in the right regard. Now we have to understand that the author is saying, we have to note that the author is saying that the economy has to grow at 8%. Please note, it has to grow at 8% for 2021-2022. Only then we will be able to compensate for the decline. If it does not grow at 8%, it will be tough for us to manage this scenario. And the last 2 years taken together cancel each other out because they have been so tough, and that is imperative for the Indian economy to grow at 8%. And for this, what we have to do is, sectors are there are some sectors that act as engine of growth. They act as engine of growth, and these sectors have to be pushed, and the government should increase its capital expenditure. Remember, it's talking about capital expenditure. They have to increase its capital expenditure. And and he's also talking about private sector. He's saying the private sector seems to be revising its future prospects now, and private sector should be aided in doing so. And we can adopt several policies from the developed countries. Apart from this, going further, the author is saying that the monetary policy plays a very important role, and monetary policy committee should take proper steps so that our monetary policy becomes accommodative, and when it is accommodative, it will be able to push the economy further. The three things are coming into play when you talk about monetary policy. First is reduce the interest rate. You have to reduce the interest rates in the economy. And second thing is that we have to, you can say, provide liquidity. We have already done it, but then we have to provide some more liquidity through various measures. And last thing is that regulatory changes through moratorium have to be made, and this will push the economy further, and this will induce demand in the economy. And according to the recent monetary policy statement, revenue money has increased by 15.3%. So we will see how this will go further, and if we inject liquidity more, we will see that the inflation will remain high, and not like extremely high, but then it will be moderately high. And if the inflation is proper, then the liquidity will be managed and there will be sufficient demand in the economy. Apart from this monetary policy, the author talks about fiscal policy, the government fiscal policy. The government's expenditure plays an important role, and the performance of the sectors like administration, defense, and other sectors, and most importantly, services, plays a very important role. And the government should not follow contractionary policy in any manner. The government should push as much as possible for these sectors particularly, and an increased public expenditure will help us to reach better heights in the economy. And in the year 2021-2022, government revenue should pick up if this is done in the right way, and the process bringing down the fiscal deficit should also start. Fiscal deficit is the deficit that we have between previous year's expenditure and this year expenditure. That should also increase. Lastly, we're talking about growth and investment that can be done. So if you talk about growth and investment, we should talk about how there's a sad fact that in the last years investment has gone down completely. It has gone down since what we saw since the regime of the Modi government. It has gone down. The rate fell to 32% from 38%. So it's a really sad thing. But there are some steps that the government has taken in this regard, where it has changed the corporate tax rate. It changed that, and it spoke about the investment climate, was given emphasis to investment climate. There's something called as national infrastructure pipeline that the government bought. So all these things can be done in the right way, and this can attract investment. Most important thing about the investment is that the climate for the investment is very important. One side you have farmers protesting, one side you have the laborers protesting. That is not the exact climate that the investor will look for to invest in a country like India. So good climate is also very important. Apart from the economy, we have to focus on all these things. Many have cherished the idea that we will become a $5 trillion economy, but then due to the pandemic, this is pushed further. Now we need to grow continuously from 8% to reach at least 9%. Only then we can think of the idea of a $5 trillion economy. It not only includes just economy, but jobs, growth, development, and all these things come into picture. This is a very nicely written article. You can pick up points from this and mention in your answers. With this, let us move on to the next article of the day. Here we are talking about taking farmers ahead, or you can say how we can go ahead with the issue of the farmers. So this caters to GS paper 2 as well as GS paper 3, GS paper 4. Now from ethics perspective, what we are learning from this article is that persuasion is not needed. Our persuasion is not enough. This saying the protesting farmers need sincerity and accountability from the center, not edification. So what we are seeing is the center is consistently using the term called as misguided. The farmers are misguided. But the farmers say we are not. We are quite aware of our rights. So here the center should move away from what you call as educating the farmers, because they're sufficiently educated. We have to move beyond persuasion, or we have to move beyond telling the farmers that this is what you're supposed to do, this is the decision making that we have done and you have to share with us. We have to go for a better thing to do. What is the better thing? I will tell you, but some facts are mentioned here, and the facts are given to the backdrop as to why farmers will not trust the Indian government. Why they will not trust is because in the year 2019 we have seen 10,000 farmer suicides. We have seen 10,000 farmer suicides, and small and marginal farmers are growing. They own 47% of the land, and farm income, the government said, was expected to rise, but it did not rise. So all these things are coming into picture, and that is why farmers will not trust the government. What the government can do is have a dialogue. Now there's a difference between edification, education, persuasion, and dialogue. Okay, persuasion and edification can fall in one thing, dialogue is another thing. We need to talk to them. It's a psychological attitude. We can reflect what the person is trying to say. We can say that if you have a positive expectation, we have it too, and dialogue plays a very important role. And that is where you can have interactive sessions, you can have problem solving, you can even pacify the protest, is what the author is saying. So this degree of negotiation is needed, which is the dialogue, and symbolic gestures will play a very important role, is what the author is saying. Second, the author talks about shared vulnerability. The government should take the stance of shared vulnerability, where you can talk to the farmers and tell them that we completely agree that you're going through these problems. We don't deny that you're going through these problems, but now it's time to find a better solution to this problem, and we are a part of this problem and we will help you to solve this problem. Only then we can go further. This is called a shared vulnerability, which will be a part of your ethics, integrity, and aptitude aspect. Building trust with the farmers is important, because the whole problem starts with farmer not trusting the government. Even when the government has given them verbal assurance that they will give them what you call as assurance for MSP, the farmers are not trusting them. So building trust for the purpose of persuasion is not good, but for the purpose of providing the right kind of solutions to the farmers is good. It is a process of proving one's sincerity, credibility, and moral character. So if all this is done in the right way, then the problem will be solved. This is very vital from the GS paper 4 perspective. With this, let us move on to the next article of the day. Here we are talking about prelims facts, and this is the first article that we are seeing. It's a news, you can say, that has come in the paper today. Now, this news talks about how India has expanded its coastal radar to countries like Maldives, Myanmar, and Bangladesh. Previously, it was there in the countries like Mauritius, Sri Lanka, and Seychelles, but now it is expanded to these countries. Now, with the help of this coastal radar network, our country, which was already existing in this sector, would be able to track the activities in the oceans, about the climate, not just about climate, but also about any kind of activities, illegal activities, any upcoming threats, any upcoming problems will be able to be handled. Now, another aspect that comes into picture is IFC-IOR. IFC-IOR means the Information Fusion Center of the Indian Ocean region. Information Fusion Center of the Indian Ocean region, which is the aspect of the Indian Navy. It's a part of the Indian Navy. Now, this IFC-IOR is the coordinating agency of this radar network. Now, this helps to strengthen maritime security in the region, like I told you, which is it's strengthening maritime security, and it provides us information about what is happening across the borders. Now, this will also help us in commercial aspects, where shipping aspects, where information can be exchanged about what is going to happen in the Indian Ocean region. Now, the IFC IOR has been established in the IMAX Center of Gurugram. IMAX stands for Information Management Analysis Center of Navy in Gurugram. So this is a very important, as India has a very long coastline of 7,500 kilometers. The idea of looking at the coastline and to be sure about what is happening becomes very important from internal security perspective. The second article is about the first rehabilitation center for monkeys in South India opened at Telangana. So this is a quick fact for the environment point of view. The first center for rehabilitation for monkeys in South India has been started at Telangana. So this is another important aspect. Going further, map points. Kabul, we have to know about Kabul. Kabul is the capital of Afghanistan. Previously, we have seen the map of the Kabul. So this is an important place, and there was an attack targeting MP, but 9 people have died in it. Very sadly, the place of Kabul becomes important. Philippines has come into picture. The country of Philippines and the Cagayan Valley has come into picture. So these two things become important. So this is the map of Southeast Asia, and here is Philippines. Okay, it's very close to South China Sea, it is very close to the Philippine Sea, it is very close to the Celeb Sea. Okay, so it's pretty close to India as well. So this is India, and if you see, Myanmar is our only gateway to Southeast Asia. Of course, through China we can't reach there, but then it is a very good friend of Philippines. It's a part of the Southeast Asian Act East policy as well. So the capital of Philippines is Manila. It's an archipelago. It's not a landlocked country. It's an archipelago situated in the middle of, you can say, Pacific Ocean. It lies below the Tropic of Cancer. So very close to it are, you can say, Malaysia, Indonesia, China, and Vietnam. So these things are very important from UPSC perspective. It would be nice if you have pretty much learned this map. Keep practicing it, and you will know which country borders which country. So that's it from today's DNA, guys. Thank you so much for staying tuned. I hope you enjoyed today's session. Thank you so much. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Until next time, stay safe, take care. Bye bye.